Welcome, welcome, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of Flip. Oh my gosh, time is flying.
Yes, it is.
I can't believe we have one more session after this. It's definitely been fun so far, but this session is going to be a really good one, and it's going to lead right into our field trip tomorrow. So welcome to the session on using data to inform decisions. So today's speaker will have Avery Goods and Sarah Buchhorn. Avery is an assistant analyst here at CMAP. And Sarah is associate analyst here at CMAP. And then we'll have not really our guest speaker, but one of our own, Lindsay Bailey, who's a senior planner here at CMAP. So today's agenda will look like we'll do a homework share back like we've done in the previous weeks. And then today's lesson is going to focus more on what comes after engagement. So we'll talk a little bit about how recommendations are formed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have our speaker, Lindsay Bailey, talk about one of our projects that we're working on, which will lead right into our field trip for tomorrow. And then we'll end with a really fun activity called Prioritize Investment, where we'll get to spend some dollars. So let's go right into the homework share back. You all got to do the engagement 101 discussion. So you were asked to briefly interview someone around you, a teacher, a neighbor, a family member, and talk about what ideas they have as far as improving their community. So does anyone want to share? Who did you talk to and what did you learn from that conversation? What did you enjoy about having this conversation?
Prescott's hand is raised.
Okay, Prescott, you can go ahead and share.
Okay. I spoke to a neighbor of mine whose kids I watch. She has 4 young kids. I think they're all under the age of like 7. And she loves her husband. They've been living in the community for about 2 years now. They moved from, I believe, Naperville. So they had to adjust because her husband got a new job. But I discussed with her, what do you think would help make I used the sample questions plus one additional one of my own, so I asked, what do you think would make the community more environmentally sustainable? And she disclosed, because I talked to her a lot about, don't throw your pizza boxes in the recycling, it ruins that entire load. Let produce waste decompose naturally in your garden, it'll help it better, and you won't contribute to landfill waste as much. And she was like, I wish that the tips that you gave me and stuff about being more sound about how you dispose of your trash, I wish City Hall provided stuff like that to us through like pamphlets or emails or robocalls, newsletters, something, in order to keep the community as a collective more informed, instead of just letting us haphazardly, pack our recycling bins, and then when the company that takes all of our trash comes to collect them ends up with several batches of ruined recycling because nobody knows what to do or how to dispose of what products. And she also disclosed that she wishes that they would create a better initiative for green energy on our power grid with Commonwealth Edison, saying that installing a few solar panels with the city's budget and how big it is and how little we spend on things overall like schools, some of that money could be going towards having greener energy. I asked if this space was like friendly to not people who didn't own cars, be it via sidewalks or through the affordability of the area or bus lanes. And she was like, this area is relatively affordable. I feel like there's things that happen where our utilities are bottlenecked at some times that I wish would change, so that, I wouldn't be paying an exorbitant amount of money, in my opinion, for water for me and for myself and my family, because water shouldn't cost as much as it does, which she's right, in my personal opinion. And she said that when citizens have their cars registered with the city officially and they know that this car belongs to a citizen, they shouldn't be fined up to $175 for parking on the street. It feels like kind of nickel and diming citizens who already pay taxes and help fund the city's ordinances. And she disclosed that she wishes that there were more bike lanes and accessible areas for people who don't have cars, and also for kids, because a lot of the sidewalks are damaged, a lot of the asphalt is damaged and is uneven. So if you want to roller skate or ride your bike or
Prescott, I think you cut out.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
don't see
think
he's in the meeting.
Yeah, I think he may have dropped off. Does anyone else want to go ahead and share? Connor, I see your hand raised.
Well, Prescott really just blew all of the options out of the water.
He really
there.
did. It was a
It's
lot.
Great job. I mean, on what Prescott said, in addressing surrounding infrastructure in my community, I talked to tenants in a bunch of 2 flats along my street, and addressing, the cracked asphalt, which is just completely damaging their cars, their main mode of transportation, like hitting their mufflers, and costing a lot more for them than it would cost the city to fix the actual potholes. But I guess Chicago's always under construction, but addressing that, and also in terms of providing economic support and making my community more affordable, actually, providing some money for tenants, because a majority of tenants are living on a paycheck to paycheck basis. And throughout the pandemic, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, and the economic recession resulting in major job losses, people haven't been able to live paycheck to paycheck because there are no more paychecks. It's completely unaffordable to live at this point, especially in an expensive city like Chicago. So I guess providing some money for renters, or providing some renters assistance, even as the eviction moratorium comes to a close, would be especially helpful for improving the economy and affordability of my neighborhood. But yeah, Prescott just blew mine out of the water. So basically everything they said.
Thank you, Connor. I see Kevin's hand raised.
Yeah, so like a big problem that I feel like is happening in my issue is in my community is so our police department have started to use in their patch, they started to use the Blue Lives Matter symbol basically in within their patch, and the chief of police actually went on national television to defend why they're doing it. So I feel a big thing that they could do is kind of have a community council almost, and hear opinions from a diverse community, and from community activists and people like that.
Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. Does anyone else want to share? Raphael, I see your hand raised.
Hi, hello. So I interviewed my friend Jesse, who's kind of like a mentor to me. We're both in this organization called Speak Des Plaines, which is all about community engagement. And so I thought that she'd be the perfect person to talk about this kind of stuff. And I guess the most interesting thing from our discussion was when we both kind of had this long-winded tangent almost about people-centered city planning. We were talking about the question, is it easy to ride a bike or walk? And what would help more people, get more people biking and walking? So I guess like it's an interesting thing that I'm kind of into, and it's the idea that like cities are kind of built around cars and not people. And so um, we were thinking about this like terrible spot like in the downtown of Des Plaines where it's just like several lanes, like street lanes, and it's not really accessible at all. And that kind of feeds into the problem of our downtown, which is that like it's sort of inverted, so you can just easily like drive by it, and you wouldn't even notice that that's supposed to be like this metropolitan area. And so we were just kind of thinking about how we could improve these streets so that they're more user friendly. Because we were looking at other, communities and neighborhoods that like close off streets to do like block parties and have these other celebrations, and that's not really something Des Plaines does. And so there's a lot of opportunity for that. That's untapped, I guess. So that's an interesting part for my discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Raphael. Is anyone, what did this activity teach you? What did you learn from this activity, and how does it make you view community engagement when you think about your government or organizations that are supposed to engage with the public and are making decisions on behalf of our livelihood? Prescott, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. I think this exercise definitely, because I've done some community interview stuff before for various classes and stuff, and then for just surveys that I held at petitions, and it definitely feels like that governing bodies over cities, mayoral offices, governor offices, just officials who have deciding power on a lot of things in a community's culture and economy do not put in enough effort to get outreach from people whose opinions are hallmark and paramount to the success of a community's economy. Like, never bother to schedule times to be like, hey, all of the working parents in this community, or all of the just working class people in general in this community. Instead, it always seems to be that they get their survey information from affluent, and I hate to be that not type to typecast or whatever, but it always feels like, especially when I've seen to conduct surveys on behalf of City Hall or whatever, that it's affluent, 20-somethings with no kids who are living by themselves and are renting, or people who are renting out their property in this area that they bought years ago, who are coming to speak on behalf of the people who are working and living in this city right now.
That's a really great point, Prescott. We deal with people in the community who oftentimes share their frustrations, just as you voiced, of people who don't necessarily live in the community. They may own businesses in the community. They may interact with the community occasionally, but their voices are the ones that are heard typically. And you're right, there isn't enough outreach being done to reach the hard to reach audiences, and also the residents who have lived in the community for several years. And so thank you for sharing that. I think I also see Will's hand raised.
Hi, yeah. I think along the same vein too, a lot of times, it's not the data that people in charge want to hear. And that's where you have to separate, the professional staff that are doing planning versus the politicians that are trying to push their agenda forward. It's kind of a fine balance, because you need the professionals to get in there and kind of find the data and get community engagement working. And so especially if you don't live somewhere where you're collecting the information. Like for me in this survey, like I collected information from my neighborhood. I think I know some of the issues because I live them, but at the same time, I got really interesting responses from my neighbors. So kind of realizing that I have a set expectation for the information that I think I'm going to receive, versus receiving information that, oh, that catches me off guard. I didn't think that's what I was going to hear. You kind of have to be aware of your own experiences versus the lived experiences of someone else in that sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will, for sharing that. So now we're going to go ahead and move forward with our presentation for today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sarah and Avery.
Hi everyone, I'm Avery Goods and I'm an assistant analyst here at CMAP. I would like to start out by thanking everyone who just shared back their homework assignment. That was super interesting for me to hear how diverse all of your insights were. But for now, I'm here to talk to you about recommendations. So after planners go out and gather data and talk to people, the next step is recommendations. Recommendations are suggestions for how communities can change the subject at hand or a specific area. Ultimately, the goal of these recommendations is to capture and reflect a community's needs and possibilities for the near future into a single plan. So this is just one step of the planning process. Once engagement is finished and recommendations are formed, they're woven into the plans. Plans are typically a document, but it's becoming more common for plans to be presented in interactive formats, and that can be in person or online. After the plan is finished, planners will set up events to launch the plan. And then finally, once the plan is in the community's hands, the community and planners work together to implement its recommendations. So next slide, please. To give you some ideas about what recommendations can look like, I've pulled together some examples from the Fox River Corridor Plan that CMAP created for partners up in McHenry County. Next slide, please. So here you can see some observations that CMAP staff made from data and engagement activities they participated in. So the first observation that staff made from water quality and pollution data is that the Fox River suffers from impaired water quality from chemicals and salt. So some of the recommendations that planners made to address this issue is to reduce road salt use in the winter months and to adopt green stormwater management practices. For example, members of the community can use rain barrels to capture excess water and use it to water their plants, which can naturally filter some chemicals out of the water. And then from their engagement activities, planners also noticed that there were so many different groups working and studying the health of the river and trying to improve it. So planners recommended that these groups should work together on these environmental improvement efforts to make their work more efficient and to allow these groups to expand the impacts of their work. So that's just a little taste of recommendations, and I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk more about how recommendations are actually formed.
All right, thanks, Avery. So Avery just gave y'all a sense of how recommendations are formed, actually. They start with observations from qualitative or quantitative data and incorporate research and best practices on possible solutions. So you might look for patterns in the data. For example, many vehicle collisions near a certain intersection may point to the need for safety improvements at that intersection. For spatial data like this, making maps can help identify issues and priority areas as well. It's important to keep in mind that community involvement by residents, businesses, elected leaders, and others should also happen in the recommendations phase. Recommendations should, at the very least, be vetted by the community, if not created by or alongside them. Making recommendations requires considering all possible impacts, both positive and negative. Something that sounds great on paper may have unintended consequences. Also, recommendations must be sensitive to context. An idea that worked well in one area might make little sense elsewhere. Recommendations also must be weighed against community needs, city and regional priorities, and available resources. So next slide. Often money is a limiting resource, so it's useful to be able to prioritize ideas. This table here, which is a bit small, but hopefully you'll get the idea, it lists the criteria that are used to evaluate and prioritize projects to receive funding through the Surface Transportation Program, or STP Shared Fund. So this is a federal fund that can be used for larger scale regional transportation projects in the CMAP area, like transit station improvements, bicycle and pedestrian barrier elimination, and road reconstruction. Projects are selected by a project selection committee, which includes members from the Chicago Department of Transportation and Council of Mayors. Each project seeking funding is evaluated and scored out of 100, according to the scheme that you can see here. Applicants can comment on draft scores before final project rankings and recommendations are created, and there's also a public comment period for the recommended list. So to walk through this a little bit, there are 4 categories in the evaluation: project readiness, transportation impact, planning factors, and sub-regional priority. Project readiness awards points to projects that demonstrate financial commitment and engineering work. CMAP and its partners want projects to be completed in a timely manner to protect the region's funding and deliver project benefits. A project's transportation impact score measures the existing condition of the transportation asset or need for the project, the cost effectiveness of the improvement, and the number of households and jobs that could benefit from the project's completion. So I helped out with the jobs and household benefit scoring this past spring, and that involved using our travel model to identify the places people come from and go to using the project. The total number of jobs and households within each project's reach area, which is called the travel shed, were then added together and scored out of 10 relative to other submitted projects. The planning factors section allows us to evaluate projects on their support for regional priorities identified as part of On to 2050, which is the region's long-range comprehensive plan. As an example, for the inclusive growth evaluation, we look at the percent of facility or project users that are people of color below the poverty line. And finally, sub-regional priority allows each of the 11 sub-regional councils and the city of Chicago to identify their 5 highest priority projects and award points accordingly. So this is one example of how multiple priorities and data sets combine to help create recommendations. And now, next slide. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Lindsay Bailey, who will expand on the theme of using data to inform and considering racial equity in a CMAP project. As a senior planner at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Lindsay Bailey focuses on equitable transportation and parking policy. In addition to her work at CMAP, Lindsay is co-founder of the Parking Reform Network, a public benefit nonprofit organization with the goal of educating the public about parking policy and assisting others with parking reform. She earned her Master of Science degree in Geographic Information Systems from the University of Redlands in 2004. Her undergraduate degree is in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So welcome, Lindsay, and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. It's very strange to have my bio read to me, but I'm going to talk about I was given the subject using data to inform, but with a focus on the project that I'm working on right now, which is working with Elevated Chicago to develop an equitable transit-oriented development action plan around the Garfield station. So that's 55th, and that is in the Washington Park neighborhood. Next. So there are some questions that are really helpful to think about when you are beginning a project. And it is helpful to even, think about this for yourself, but also be prepared to answer community members when you first meet with them. So who is this work for? Is it necessary? Who asked for it? And how is it going to help benefit the community at large? And an important thing that I think a lot of times I haven't always done in my career is thinking about the potential for negative impacts. Who can the process or product harm? And so some of these issues have come up in our project in the Washington Park neighborhood when we started figuring out who's going to be on our steering committee, who's going to be the guiding voices in this project. And we thought that the Elevated Green Line South community table was going to be our steering committee, but then it was apparent that no one on that group, although there was one person on the table who actually lived in the community, but the rest either worked in the community or they worked in a neighboring station hub. And so it was clear that we were going to have to turn to residents for more of the guidance and leadership in the project. So now we are in the process of forming a resident advisory council. And then a big sort of shadow over the neighborhood is the University of Chicago. And they have been expanding, they might be doing some nice things in the neighborhood, but there are people who are seeing them as a very negative force, and the potential to sort of take over the neighborhood, raise the rents, or develop student housing and eventually push people out of the neighborhood. So we have to be mindful of the different forces and who we are listening to. Next. So I took part in a training through the Dignity Institute with Dr. Destiny Thomas, and she is a really fascinating speaker and person to know in the world of transportation justice or mobility justice. And she outlined important phases when you're going to be working in a community, starting with what she calls the ethnographic overview. So really diving deep into the data, the history, and also having an immersive experiences. So watching how people interact and engage with a space. And as you go through this process, and for us, it comes out in what we might call the existing conditions report. And once you have that, once you've pulled together sort of your understanding of some of the important aspects of the community, maybe the positive sides, opportunities, things like that, then in the next phase, you present that to the community and ask for them to either validate or invalidate what you have found. And in that process, you help to pull out what are more of the values, what are some of the things that people see as the really wonderful aspects of their community that you might not have known as an outsider. And then the third is to then bring on people who have more power, people who are technical folks, people who work at the city, and then work to facilitate a discussion where you can co-create solutions so that you continue along the way to validate the importance of the local knowledge and what they can bring to the table and work together to come up with solutions that work for everybody. And I did want to tell a not related to CMAP story of something where that didn't happen and how that created a failure. Because before I worked at CMAP, I spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala. And you would see, when you're there for 2 years, you see different groups coming in, and a lot of times with this idea of we're going to do good in the community, give back in some way, and they're in town for a week and they do something and then they leave. There was a Habitat for Humanity project where they were building houses, and they didn't stop and ask the locals why nobody built houses on the back of this little, it was kind of like a little mountain in front of the big mountain. And so they built some houses and they said, here you go, we built these houses, bye, thank you. And it was within a year, all the roofs were gone because there is a really strong wind that comes down the mountain and through that valley and right up the back of the mountain. And so they knew they only built houses on the front. You don't build houses in the back because of the wind, but nobody asked them. And so it was a complete waste of resources that they could have done better with. So that's all side. Next slide. Also from Dr. Thomas was this idea of creating a dignified narrative. And this is especially important when you're working with marginalized communities. And I'm going to go through a little bit of these 4 points on what we mean by creating a dignified narrative and how we are trying to do this for this particular community in Washington Park. Thanks. So the first one is an emphasis on attributing accountability for inequities to structure and institutional factors. Next slide. We were just about to start our engagement process when the pandemic hit March of last year. And so we didn't go out into the community. We didn't do the typical phases that we would have done, but instead we went deep into old archives of the Chicago Defender, which was an African-American newspaper that was started in 1905 by Robert Abbott. We went through books on Chicago and really pulled out as much of the history as we could. And we went looking we used this model of the United for a Fair Economy of categorizing some of these events in history as to whether they were helpful or harmful to the community. So this is where we're trying to look at what are some of these institutional policies or programs that impacted the neighborhood. So as population is growing in the neighborhood, this is that line in the middle. Really, it was in the 40s where we started to see, I mean, there were some bad things that happened earlier, but the most harmful policies, the Blighted Areas Act and redlining and cuts to CTA service. And this is at a point where the population is peaking. So if we go to the next slide, we continue on into the 50s. And you start to see the impacts of those policies on population. The people who could leave often did. And the population got a little boost in the 60s when they built the Robert Taylor homes and cleared out a large neighborhood. And those homes were very desirable when they were built. They had such a huge waiting list. They couldn't even house everyone that wanted housing. And they focused on families with children. And, you know, that's great to prioritize children, but the school system, who was warned that there was going to be an influx of a lot of children, really wasn't prepared and didn't build enough schooling to accommodate the growth in children. And there was so much resistance from integration from the white schools that even though neighboring schools were had plenty of room, they wouldn't allow the Black students to go to those neighboring white schools. And so this led to a lot of different problems in the area and the protests and the uprisings of, we need to have equal resources. There was a point where they had so many children that they were reduced to half-day schedules. So they would have one group who'd come in the morning and one group who'd come in the afternoon. So it wasn't a fair system. We weren't getting the same education across the city. So that's just an example of highlighting some of these historical inequities and how they impact the community. Next. Oh, forgot about this. This is an image we found of what the area looked like before we built the Dan Ryan Expressway through it. So this was the high density housing that was pretty run down, very overcrowded, because Black people weren't allowed to live anywhere in the city. They were limited to this small section of the Black Belt where they were paying more in rent than what white homeowners were paying for their mortgages. And the next slide sort of fades into what it looked like in the 60s when they, I think it's supposed to show up. There, well, okay. Created about 14 lanes of road and tried to put everybody neatly into these giant towers of the Robert Taylor homes. Next. All right, emphasize assets, unique strengths, and culture-bearing characteristics. Slide, next slide. When we were pulling together our existing conditions information, it was really important to the community group that we were talking to that we made sure to have people in a lot of our photos and highlighting the positive sides of the community. And so we have the group that's outside, even in the pandemic, exercising, trying to bring health to the community. So really looking at what are some positive aspects that we can highlight, what are things that bring people joy, because that isn't necessarily something you see in the media typically. Next. Focusing on need and not deficit, emphasizing creative, culturally relevant types of intervention. Next slide. We did a tour with Guillaume Foreman, who some of you will get to meet tomorrow, and you'll get to hear his spiel on all this, but we made videos of him leading the tour and talking about some of the great things that are in the community. And we just thought that was a nice way to highlight some of the positive aspects and what has been going on and who is already doing the work in the community. Next. And this last one, I feel like this is something that Dr. Thomas really helped me to understand better, and the importance of how we present data. So next slide. So if we just throw out factors that have the stats, it can seem unbiased, but if we don't clarify the context in which the data is coming out, the stats on the left, someone could attribute what's going on in the community to race and saying that race is the responsible factor when you don't have the larger context. So a sample of that is the federal policy of redlining denied people, Black people particularly, access to loans for buying or improving homes in Black areas or establishing or expanding businesses beginning in the 1940s. I had heard about the policy of redlining in undergrad, but I really understood it to be for home ownership and was only recently clued into the impacts on businesses. So even the people who owned businesses in the neighborhoods, they couldn't get loans to improve their business. So it was worth it to leave the area and take their business elsewhere. And so that has led to a lot of what we see in terms of the various deserts. Is it's a food desert or it's a retail desert. These are things that had real impacts and were still impacted by them. So next. And I also, we can probably share this link. I found this toolkit for centering racial equity through data integration and found it really interesting of thinking about the risk and the benefit when you are working with data and how you're sharing it, and understanding that there are risks in putting the data out there and there are benefits, and you want to make sure we focus on, sorry if I'm breaking up, the data that has a high benefit and a low risk, and avoid things like facial recognition, predictive analytics, and policing, because those are things where the algorithms that have trained these systems are biased and they can have continued negative impacts. So that is all. Next. Oh, thank you for sharing that. So that is all I have for using data in the context of doing a project in a marginalized community with equity as a focus.
Thank you, Lindsay. I feel like I've learned so much in this past few minutes. So thank you for your time and for setting the stage for what we will eventually learn more about tomorrow. So we do have about 15 minutes for question and answer, and then we'll get into our prioritized investment activity. So we're going to ask students to use the raise your hand feature. So you can unmute and ask your question. You're also welcome to use the chat as well. So do we have any questions at the moment for Lindsay? Let's look at the chat.
It's so weird to be in a remote digital environment because it's harder to be the person that comes out and has a question.
Very true. Well, I guess I can get us started. Well, actually, it looks like Dominique has a question, so I'll hold off. Dominique, please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, so I was just wondering, in terms of prioritizing equity, I know that there have been a lot of issues with like certain like legal jargon and stuff about how you can't like prioritize specific, you know, races or whatever, you know, like you can't give grants to specific races and things like that. So how do you kind of work around that to provide for the community in need without like, you know, the legal issues, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think a really good example of addressing that would be Elevated Chicago. It's an organization that is run through the Community Trust. And by partnering with them, we were able to access some additional funds they do a lot of small grants to community organizations, and they're able to prioritize where they see there is the most need. And so it's not, obviously not a race-based donation or grant, but they know where their funding is going. They go to community groups doing the work on the street. And but we at CMAP, we don't have a lot of fun. I mean, we don't have funding that we can just give out. We are pretty restricted legally in what we can do.
All right, Lindsay, we have a couple questions in the chat. One is from Aaron. What is your favorite aspect of your work? And what is the biggest obstacle you've had to encounter or you have encountered?
Okay, I'll start with the first one. I would say my favorite aspect of the work, I don't know, I guess it's a couple of things, but being able to work on things that interest me, so that because I am someone who is passionate about particular issues, I'm given the chance to really go deep on these topics. And you heard I have a little bit of a focus on parking. When I first came to CMAP, I worked with folks to get a little bit of parking policy into our long range plan. And once it was in the plan, then it was something that I could actually do work with technical assistance. So now I can focus on that. So the ability to choose where our interests go and what we do with them is really nice. And it's also a good work-life balance. I came from federal government before this and felt like nobody really wanted to put in all that much effort and work. And yet when I came here, it was like a consultant kind of mindset, but with the balance of, you know, at the end of the day, you go home and you're not still on the clock. And then the other one, the biggest obstacle, I think it's frustrating to see that it takes so much time for things to get done. And we are dealing with a lot of large institutional systems that have been set up in a certain way that I would like to change. And it's not something that you can change overnight. And it can be frustrating. It's the long game that we're playing.
Our next question, Lindsay, is from Bryce. I know one way you're trying to make transportation more equitable is shown in the Garfield Green Line South Action Plan. But is there anything else you have done or are doing to make transportation more fair for everyone? It's a big question.
It is. I worked on the project to collect data on sidewalks for the region, and we had no inventory of where we had sidewalks for the 7 counties around Chicago. And so we made it a point to get really good aerial imagery and then a team of full-time staff and interns to go through and create a data set that has every sidewalk, whether there is every roadway, if it has sidewalks on both sides or one side or not at all. And that data set has been really helpful for communities that want to improve walkability and prioritize where they could put sidewalks in. So I feel like that's one project of helping to build that. But I also scheme with MPC about how our transportation dollars could be more equitably spent and how we can influence change in that area. So one thing that I can't take responsibility for is the STP shared fund. They did add the factor of equity into the scoring process, and that wasn't in there before. But it was a pretty big step that unfortunately there were communities that were not into that. And so there was a bit of a process to really bring people along and help them understand that it would be good for the region as a whole.
Lindsay, this question is from Kevin. Has any of the residents expressed interest in the council you're looking to start?
Yes, and right now we actually are trying to figure out how we narrow down, because our contract says we can have 10 to 15 people. In because we have funding to be able to compensate them. And so we're looking to do that in the form of gift cards or Visa cards. And we know what the budget is. And if we bring on too many people, we either won't get to pay them as much, or it will get out of hand with having such a large group and trying to work together on that. So working actually with Courtney to figure out how to prioritize. And we really have said we want to focus on people who have lived in the neighborhood for a long time, and also young people who have grown up there. And so we haven't started the cutting process yet, but we do have a lot of people that are interested, and people who are very rightly concerned with an outsider coming into the community to do work.
Great. So we have Dominique's hand raised, and I'm also going to ask Ali and Krishna to unmute themselves and ask their questions, because I think they both have really good questions. But we'll start with Dominique.
Sorry, I didn't realize my hand was still raised, but I did actually post a question in the chat about how you gain funding and if you had any recommendations for the grant writing process.
So I didn't write any grants and not skilled in that, but that is something that I highly recommend that anyone wants to get a job in, work on that, learn about getting money. But we, in our Elevated Chicago, approached us to do this project and another one in Logan Square, and they had funding, and they were the ones who said, you know, we can give money to this, but what we're going to do is we're going to match whatever funding the government agencies can put towards it. And the Regional Transportation Authority, or RTA, they came up with $10,000. Not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's something. And so Elevated matched that. So really, I'm going to give all the credit to Elevated. They were the ones who leveraged the money they had and said, we're going to get more for this. You need to contribute something.
Great. I see Greg's hand raised. I'm sorry, I missed you earlier, Greg. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Well, I sometimes hear that anytime there's a project proposed, there's kind of a bias towards keeping the status quo, like building more bike infrastructure or something, that there's more bias towards not doing it or keeping it the same. I'm wondering if you've encountered this and how you move past that, or how you consider that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say I've found that more in my work in parking policy, because a lot of what we see in areas that have a parking problem is that a lot of people want to come to one area and they all want to park right in front of where they're going. And the only way to address that problem is going to be to use meters and to charge people for the time of the high demand area. And you know, you mentioned start paying for parking, people's heads explode. So what we try to do in that situation is really just lay out all the pros and cons and say, you can do whatever you want. If you go this route, these are some of the impacts that it will have. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. And really put it in front of the community to say, you get to make the decision. We're just presenting you with the information on how the things that you might do would have an impact or not. And a lot of it comes down to money, really.
So we can end with these two last questions. One is from Ali and Krishna. So I'm going to ask Ali to unmute herself first and ask the question.
Okay, so kind of going back on the history part of it, you talked about Washington Park is so close to Hyde Park, and I did a study how Hyde Park was heavily influenced and kind of controlled by the University of Chicago because they wanted to come off inclusive, but at the same time, they weren't very inclusive. So when you did your deep dive into the history, did you find that University of Chicago had any control of Washington Park?
We really only heard anecdotally about the influence of the university in the neighborhood. I think there's been more of an impact to the south of the university in Woodlawn, especially with the Obama Presidential Center coming in and the potential for gentrification and people land speculators where they're buying up property. But then we also know, because we have the parcel data, the university owns a lot of property around the Garfield station. And they, they built the Green Line Performing Arts Center. The Arts and Public Life is a really wonderful group that is kind of an arm of the university, but they do like to clarify they get their own funding. And if they didn't find funding, the university would not keep supporting them. And they do a lot of great with the community work, free art exhibits and classes. But, we talked to students at the Clio Center, and one of them said the building he grew up in was bought by the university and they raised the rents and people couldn't stay there. So we know that it's happening and we know we need to be mindful of that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. And our final question will be from Krishna.
Hello. I was just wondering how local politicians and maybe state politicians have been involved in the Green Line project, and also how they kind of play a role in other projects you've worked on.
I would say they so far have not been involved, and that is, let's see, I wish that they would talk to us, but right now we're starting with the residents. We've had one alderman, unfortunately, and I don't have evidence for this, but I feel like intentionally this community has been divided in the wards. So the dividing line is 55th, I think. And so it's split into 2 wards. And because it's at the edge of these 2 different wards, it's less of a primary concern, and they could maybe point to the other aldermen for any complaints. And so we have been gently suggested that we should be doing a plan on 47th Street by the alderman to the north. And, she has her ideas of what she wants to see, and that's where we should be working. So we're still kind of trying to ease into that. And then the other alderman further to the south has been very busy with a lot of other things and hasn't had a time to sit down with us. So we hope to work with them in the future, but really need to start with the residents before we bring in the people with power, as we described them before.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay, I'd like to thank you again for your time. Students, if you actually want to learn more about the project, there's still time to attend tomorrow's field trip. Just have that waiver form completed. We've already sent out a couple of reminder emails, but you still have time. So you can show up tomorrow morning with the waiver and you still can attend the field trip. So again, thank you, Lindsay. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. You're welcome to stick around and attend the breakout room activity, but otherwise, feel free to head out.
I'd love to, but I gotta pick my kid up from camp.
All right, not a problem.
Thank you.
So now, thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to hand it over to Avery and Sarah to introduce our breakout room activity.
All right, thank you. So next slide. Oh, okay, so as has kind of been a theme in this session, there isn't enough money to fund everything. So in this activity, you're going to go through the process of deciding what's most important to fund. And your facilitator will go over this in more detail, but to give you the basic idea, so there are projects that we want, like paving roads, building bike lanes, planting trees and making areas beautiful, and building apartments or homes. So you have to decide what kind of things are most important to you, and not only to you, but what does the community need? So next slide. So in this activity, you have $2 billion to spend on various projects. So first, you as a team will seek to spend the money on projects that make the most sense to you. And there's a defined set of projects that you'll see. So try to choose at least one from each category and have, discussion, come to a conclusion as a team, but don't be afraid to say your opinion and have some good discussion about that. Then after you think about it as yourself, choose a persona, and those will also be listed out in the mural board. And consider if being that person changes what you would pick. And then we will come back together and have some debrief. So we'll have several breakout rooms. We'll all be using a mural board to help facilitate this activity. And I think that link will be dropping in the chat. There it is. And I think that's it. So Michelle, if you want to do the
Yes.
breakout.
Thank you, Sarah. So we'll have to, just to add on to that, we'll have 20 minutes in the breakout room. So I'm now going to open the rooms. See you all in 20 minutes.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I haven't been outside yet. I hear it's really, really hot out. Well, I went outside earlier, but it was really hot. Laura, you can go ahead and share your screen now. Do you all have access to the mural board now? Okay, great. Okay, so we're group 3. So let me see. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there should be 5 different personas. You can see them at the bottom. Can you just, yeah, thank you, Laura. So I'll just randomly pick you guys, but Greg, you can be persona A. Connor, you can be persona B. Raphael, you can be C. Lena, you can be D, and Allie, you can be E. Am I leaving anybody else out? I think that's everybody. Okay, so if you can zoom in, Laura, on the Post-its right there. So you can see here, do I have my mirror board up too? You can see the different categories. Laura, can you go over to the right just so we can see what categories we have? We have roads, transit, bikes, sustainability, accessibility, and housing. So based on your persona, now we have these little Post-it notes that you see over to the left. We have to choose how we want to spend our $2 billion based on your persona and what you think is priority to you. So I'm going to let you all you should be able to like move I am not familiar with Miro, so Laura, you might have to do an explanation on how to use it. Or Laura can move it for you over to the section that you choose.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Let me see. It should be as easy as double clicking once you've gone onto the Miro board, and then that should give you the opportunity to be able to move the sticky notes. But I can definitely move them around whenever you guys need.
And remember, we're group 3, so if you're on the mural board, you should be under the group 3 board. And I'm just gonna pull up the board.
Lena, do you have a question?
Yes, mine keeps reloading. So can You move it for me then when I figure out which option?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Should we just move on our own, or should we
Yeah,
discuss?
you can discuss. We'll discuss a little bit, but as you're moving them around and you're placing them, I'll ask you, why did you put which Post-it note in a certain place?
Well, I'm gonna scoot that one right over there.
Could you share the link one more time in the chat? I'm sorry.
Sure. There we go. Let me know if you have it. So Connor, you put the install solar panels on every government building?
Yes.
Okay.
The reason I did that is because it would align with my persona as a climate advocate and persona ease thing, because they are a community activist, and environmental concerns fit into activism, as well as persona C and D, because persona C wouldn't be viable to in terms of government, or have obligations to power corporations that would likely leverage their control over government buildings, and persona D would get a benefit, or a free ride sort of benefit, by having less power overall being allocated to the city. So that is why I chose that.
Okay. Are you all having some issues moving? It seems like some people might be having some issues. So I see somebody hovering over the blue stickies. So who is over the blue stickies?
I am, and somebody else's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody needs assistance moving things over, Laura can help you. Just let her know which sticky you want to move. So it looks like somebody just put job training for people with disabilities. Who put that there?
I did again.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, Connor. Connor's gonna spend up our budget.
I'm gonna spend all your budget. Yeah, you guys can
Fine
vote
with
on
this.
this.
He has great judgment.
You can
That's
vote me out
good.
here.
You know, my
I
persona
don't.
would be cool with this. I want more jobs. He's
Yeah.
making more jobs. This is a-okay.
Okay.
Sustainability projects, that fits into disability advocacy, because sustainability, also applies to human beings. It's not.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we can hire people to plant more trees. Ooh, I'd love that. Yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that one too because my persona wants jobs, summer jobs for her kids as well.
Okay, so far we're at 500 million. And then Laura, I don't know if you saw Allie's comment, but she wants to move, hire people to plant trees.
Ooh, I see. Okay.
Hold on now. We've got 2,000 million, right?
We're at 500 million right now.
500 million out of 2,000 million, or 2 billion, right? Do you guys also want to throw in, replace 50 diesel buses with electric ones, because it would cut down, since we've already voted to, get that power grid, get government buildings off the power grid to be more sustainable? Why don't we redistribute a little bit of that electrical power diesel buses, which would not only provide for people who want climate advocacy, but it would likely increase affordability because buses would no longer have to rely on fuel, you know, and that sometimes shifts rates. So that person D, come on, I'm really.
Connor, you're a real climate activist. I'm believing you are.
Oh, maybe.
Are we allowed to disagree?
Yes,
Yes, you're
absolutely,
allowed to
please.
disagree.
Are the new buses 600 million? Or how much are they?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
600 million.
I personally think tearing down the highway would have a much bigger impact in terms of climate because like when you tear down big roads, generally it's not the same amount of cars who are going to keep using the smaller roads. So that's a lot less vehicles that I think is more impactful than just replacing 50 buses. So I think that would have a bigger scope.
That's a good point, Greg.
And also, I think in general, even a diesel bus is much better environmentally than just a private car. So even though we're not getting the electric ones yet, I don't know. I still think a diesel bus is better than everyone using the highway.
And Greg, you're persona A, right?
Yeah. Oh, shoot. I didn't really bring up bikes. But yeah, that would also be more bike.
That would, if you wanted to allocate some funds for bike lanes, hey man, I love the environment. I love bikes, you know, why don't you want to form a little cabal here? You want to?
Wow, we're really getting into the politics of the simulation.
So Lena has messaged me and said, can we move 200 new affordable for families for 300 million?
Yes. I think, I mean, at least for my persona, I'm a single parent and I'm worried about having affordable housing.
What do you all think about that?
No, as a mayor who wants more traffic and more jobs, allowing more people to live in the area and, you know, to occupy these jobs and create more traffic would be great. So, more housing. Woohoo!
So are we in agreement for the 200 new affordable apartments?
Good with me.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about 100 miles of new protected bike lanes? My persona wants accessibility, but is also worried about the environment, wants to be more sustainable.
I think that would be amazing. Bikes are also very affordable, so it's good in terms of equity of transportation and making it cheap to get around, including Persona D's kids getting to their summer jobs.
So you all do have 400, it looks like you have 400 million left. So right now, it looks like what you have on the board, you've already spent your 2 billion. If I'm counting right. If my math is right, you all have already spent your 2 billion. So are you comfortable with what you spent your money on? Does everyone agree with what you spent your money on? Any pushback?
Listen, I'm not one to torpedo my own sustainability idea, but I'm going to be real. If accessibility is a major factor in everybody's, you know, sort of persona here, and also if you'd rather get around on bikes and have more area for transportation, it would be very good to rebuild the 100 intersections in the blue section or widen the 10 miles of downtown sidewalks, but that could lead to endless urban sprawl, which as an environmentalist, no, no, the mayor and I are gonna have some heated discussions, but I can already tell. But I'm all for the sustainability categories. If we can leave that as it is, that'd be amazing. But
So I noticed that no one chose anything in the yellow category, which is roads, and nothing in the purple, which is transit. Why did you guys not choose anything?
I didn't, just because my persona was more focused on accessibility and housing and sustainability. So those are the ones that I kind of focused on. So I would say my persona would be happy and not as worried about transit and traffic, and because they'd rather have like the bike lanes and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Yeah, I also, I mean, I'd be most interested in making 100 intersections safer, but I think the 100 miles of protected bike lanes is more impactful, and that's also safe. So,
Okay, that's a good point.
I'd be more interested in the intersections myself. A big part of my agenda is building roads, creating more traffic. So if there's more traffic and less accidents because the intersections are safer, then that would satisfy me, Persona C.
How do you think this process looks in real life? Not this simple, right?
I think a
no,
lot would
Go
go in the
sorry.
yellow category.
Let's see here.
I think it looks like Game of Thrones. Someone gets on top of the conference table, tries to, start a fight or something over the bike lanes.
I definitely feel like there would be pushback in real life, just because we have put a lot of focus on sustainability. And I definitely think there would be some residents that would want more like transit and like better roads, like filling in the potholes and stuff like that. So I could definitely see some pushback there.
So,
What do you guys think may be some strategies, if you're working with, let's say, your colleagues, because this happens at work, right? This happens at our agency. You have conflicting viewpoints. You have people that may not be as knowledgeable on certain topics, sustainability or accessibility. Those also might not be issues that they're familiar with if they live and operate in certain neighborhoods and are not familiar with how accessibility might be an issue in other neighborhoods. So, for example, tomorrow during the field trip, if any of you all are going, we'll be in Washington Park. So I actually live in Bronzeville. I have spent a lot of time in Washington Park. I'm also a Southsider, born and raised. And there are a lot of Southside neighborhoods that have sidewalks that are not accessible. There are transit stops that are not just on the South Side, or not just on the West Side, but also on the North Side that are not accessible. And so when you are working with people who may not understand how accessibility may be more of a challenge in certain neighborhoods, then of course there may be disagreements. So how would you say, if you guys got along pretty well, if you didn't, what are some ways that you can convey to maybe other colleagues, or maybe if you were working with community members who may have conflicting viewpoints, how would you work with them? How would you get them to agree with what you have on your board? And it doesn't have to be this specific, but just in general, what do you think are some ways?
So I've been role playing this character as somebody who is flexible, and so if he doesn't believe in climate change, but if it's going to create more jobs or if it's going to make things safer for his agenda, then it's whatever. But I feel like a lot of these people are uncompromising, especially if it's anything to do with sustainability. He'd be like, "Oh, sustainability? What does that mean? And then they'll get in a big fuss about it. So I feel like, you know, framing issues and making them appeal to another person, or like, you know, framing it in a way that they'll understand. Because, you know, for people like us who are, I guess, we're progressive and forward thinking, it's a lot of things get pretty wordy. And I guess the way that we treat other people can kind of reflect on the way that like we get to them. Like if we're, you know, preachy and, you know, we talk down to them because, you know, we think that we know better than them, then they won't collaborate with us in the same way.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a matter of perspective, I guess.
absolutely. Thank you for that, Raphael, I think, yes. Okay. My screen is all over the place right now.
No worries.
Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I completely agree with Raphael. Knowing someone's perspective, especially, oh, I got 55 seconds. Knowing somebody's perspective, especially as shown through this game, would be very important. And maybe even though you can't really narrow it down to a list of adjectives or demands that somebody wants, knowing at least what they are and trying to play to those demands or, you know, wants or needs would be especially helpful in planning, being on the same level as somebody. Boom, did it in 30 seconds.
Excellent. And in the last 20 seconds, I'll say, one, thanks for sharing your perspectives, and thanks for contributing to the mural board. Yeah, see you in the next reflection. Thank you, Laura.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. It's been a pleasure.
All right. So we're back in the main room. We have a couple minutes to discuss what we all learned during this activity. So I'm going to ask a couple students to raise their hand and unmute themselves and share what this experience was like. So some questions to consider is, did the personas make a difference in what projects were funded? Does it make you wonder who decides what gets built? What projects got left out? Are there any less important? Do we think any other projects were less important? And then finally, were there projects or categories missing from the list of projects you had to choose from? So I see Seth's hand raised, so.
All right, so we aimed to kind of follow the personas and kind of also follow our own opinions. We started with bikes, and we also tried to cover all of the categories. And we were group 1, so if you want to look at our board, you can see what I'm talking about. So we chose 100 miles of new protected bike lanes for $400 million. This is a lot of miles of bike lanes, and they're also protected, which is better than just painted bike lanes as they're exposed to traffic. Next we did sustainability, replace 50 diesel buses with electric ones. We thought this was a pretty good long-term investment. And yeah, we also considered planting 10,000 trees and installing solar panels on every government building, because those were also good long-term investments. For roads, we did 100 roundabouts with fence in the middle. Roundabouts look nice. They're also safer, so they're better for accessibility. And this was also one of the cheapest options. So that was a good choice. For transit, we decided to add 10 new bus routes. This was also one of the cheapest, and 10 new bus routes is a lot. So having a lot more interconnectedness in the city is very important. We did not do make buses in the suburbs free for everyone because I felt that usually sometimes that doesn't really incentivize people to use public transport, and buses are often pretty cheap, especially like if you would live in the suburbs suggestively, and they're not always going to mean that people are going to use them even if they're free. And then finally, we had $600 million left. So between housing and accessibility, we thought that 200 new affordable apartments and widening 10 miles of downtown sidewalks for pedestrians and wheelchairs were the best options to cover all of the categories.
Thanks for sharing, Seth. So you got all 5 categories, correct? Or for each category?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Great. So we have Will's hand raised. Oh, Will, did you lower your hand?
Oh, no, I think my hand's still
Okay,
raised.
still up. Fantastic. So we'll hear Will's comment, then we'll go into our reflection. So
Yeah.
Will, feel free.
So I was from group 2, and if anyone from my group has any additions, like there were some good points raised. So starting with roads, I think we went back and forth about, I think it was potholes and the roundabout was in there at one point, and I think we eventually landed on potholes because a really good point was raised about how unsafe it is for, if you hit several potholes with your car, it can tear your car apart, and then it just creates issues for then you being able to get places because now your car doesn't work or bicyclists can't be safe. Transit, making buses in the suburbs free for everyone. Idea was raised as well about why isn't transit just free or reduced for those who really need it. And if you're traveling from the suburbs to get to your job, that's going to be pretty important for you. And it can also reduce carbon emissions. So 200 million to that. And then 10 new bus routes. That one was something we added a little bit later because, having gaps in transit, if you don't have the ability to own a car, that's your lifeline to get to work. And so if you can have more of those gaps filled, more of those opportunities available to hop on the bus, and maybe that's how you get to, the L or any other kind of transit, like that's important. Bikes, we went back and forth on as well, but we landed on installing a lot of bike racks. That was a good filler for the last little bit of money that we had, but also, like keeping your bike safe is pretty important. And then sustainability, we had the rain garden and the trees on here at first, but we pulled those off because initially we found it was more important to just cut your carbon emissions that you're already producing. So in doing that, get rid of your diesel buses and replace them with electric ones. Accessibility, widening the sidewalks, sidewalk gapping and kind of figuring that stuff out was really important. And then job training is also important for programming your community. And then housing, 200 new affordable apartments. I don't think we ever really disagreed or said anything about that one just because housing was a key point. So that's what I got for group 2.
Thank you, Will. So we'll actually have more time to reflect on this activity in our final reflection. So we have about 7 minutes, honestly, to discuss what you learned from today's activity, but we also have some questions for you to consider as well. So for example, has the field of planning, or has FLIP, I should say, expanded or changed your understanding of urban planning? And then our first question, is the field of planning what you imagined it would be before FLIP? And then our final question would be for you to consider what you're looking forward to for next week. So just a quick recap, our first week focused on foundations and planning. So you got a general overview of urban planning principles. Then our second week, we discussed planning and practice. And then finally, in our third week, this week, we focused on using data to inform decisions. And so we have one more week left, and our final week will focus on implementing a plan. So you'll have an opportunity to do an activity where you actually will be creating your own plan. So that is for our final week. But we'll now go into breakout rooms for the last time for today, and then come back and close out. So you'll be in the same breakout room, just for a shorter time period. So let me open up the rooms. And I'm actually gonna set the timer for 5 minutes. All right, rooms are open.
Hey.
Hi guys.
Hello.
So in these last 5 minutes that we have, does anyone want to jump in and just share? And you don't have to respond to all the questions, but whatever question resonates with you, you know, is planning what you imagined? Are you interested in planning? After 3 weeks so far, are you like, no, I don't think I want to be a planner? Does it feel very complicated to you? Or is it something that you feel like, you want to go into, you're passionate about your community and you want to make a change in your community? Yeah, just let you guys go ahead and share.
I guess I can start with the first one. So it's planning is very like bureaucratic, and that's not. I mean, like I knew that was true, and I guess a book, Street Fight. It's by Jeanette Sadik-Khan, and she was like working in New York City, but I don't know. She kind of gets into a lot of like bureaucratic fights and like all these public meetings, and so that's just a recommendation because I think it's close to what I'm definitely seeing in the program. But yeah, but I still think that's like a good thing and it's kind of necessary because it's like incremental change is I don't know, I like it. And because I don't know, it's hard to make these big steps. So yeah.
I have to agree with you. Like, development and planning is really slow moving. I like local politics, so I always make it a point to go to my city council meetings that happen every 3 weeks, and it's just interesting how slow the process is to get like one building, to become like a heritage site or whatever. Like it's just it takes months, like weeks, like handshakes and public comment. Like it's very incremental, like you said. But that doesn't really deter me because I feel like despite the process being so slow, there is that capacity to make an actual change for people and to improve their lives. And urban planning, city planning, this kind of stuff that happens on a pretty local level, I feel like this is the way that like people that actual change can be made on like a personal level, which I always appreciate.
Absolutely. Yeah, building off of Raphael and Greg's comments in terms of bureaucracy and the effects of local government. I mean, to scale it up, I can't imagine how long it takes for like the federal or state governments to get even the most minuscule bit of planning done. How many handshakes and conferences and meetings it must go through, how much time it actually takes to get things done. Sorry, not sorry for not being so. Words are escaping me right now. I'm sorry, but yeah, I really do like urban planning and design. I think it's one of the easiest ways to make change happen, even though it definitely isn't easy. But yeah, I like it a lot.
Anyone else want to share in our last minute? I definitely think what you shared, the three of you just shared, even our planners share those same sentiments. I am not a planner. I work in community engagement for the agency, but a lot of our planners, maybe started at CMAP. And because we're a big MPO, because we serve such a huge part of our region, we do serve 7 counties, they often express the challenges of not feeling like they get that local planning experience of being able to like be hands-on with the planning projects. So we do have some planners who don't like that, and then they end up going to more city planning. So working directly for like the cities that we serve and being their city planner. And we're very close with the Chicago's Department of Planning. And so a lot of former CMAP planners have gone to Chicago DPD and to do work there. And so a lot of them have voiced feeling like they feel like their work is more impactful because they're so close to it. And here we're more higher level. So yeah. Thanks for sharing again. See you in the big room.
Okay, see ya.
It's been a pleasure again.
All right, we are back. I hope you all enjoyed your reflection. Our group discussed a lot of things that we talked about during today's activity. And we also spent some time covering what the FLIP experience has taught them about urban planning. So I hope your reflections was just as productive and informative. So we'll now close out with our homework assignment for today. So as a reminder, this is available on the Engagement HQ page. And so the assignment is focused on investment in your community. So the prompt is, how might you invest in your own community? What would you choose and why? And how do competing priorities shape a community's decision? So basing it on the prioritized investment activity, think about what you would do to invest in your own community. And so the prompt is online on the engagement page, and it's open for you all to add comments. The only reminder I had is that we do have that field trip tomorrow. So if you have not completed your waiver form, please get that to us as soon as possible. Also, feel free to email us if you do decide to come tomorrow morning. That way we have you accounted for. And please bring water with you. It is going to be a hot day.
Yes, hot water and sunscreen.
Yes.
And to add on to what Michelle said, you all can shoot me a quick message, a private message right here on Zoom if you decide that you want to come on the field trip, or send me an email. I drop my email in the chat. And let me know by 5 p.m. today, because we need to get those food orders and stuff in, and we want to make sure you can eat. So the waivers, like Michelle said, you can turn those in tomorrow to us. We'll also have some blank copies. So if you do come with your parent or guardian, they can fill out those forms tomorrow. Make sure you're here no later than 10:15. We don't want to leave you. We're leaving at 10:30 sharp. And make sure you bring comfortable walking shoes, because we will be doing some walking. So thank you for tuning into the session. Michelle, anything else?
That's it. See you next week or tomorrow.
See you next week for our last session.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye, thank you.
You too. Courtney, can you hit stop record, por favor?